This is a talk that we have actually been anticipating, of us who are on the planning committee, for a lot of know, because we've actually talked to Tom about this over the last few years. I'm going to introduce Tom in just a moment, but I'm going to take us a live stream to tell them how they can communicate with us, and then introduce Tom and pass it. So it's a little bit earlier in the month, so that we're not hitting end of school, having everybody go crazy over long weekends and things. QC will be joining us to talk about children's participation in different types of family dispute resolution processes. She has a wide range of different processes herself and deals with children in a variety of different ways. So she's going to bring a lot of tools that we can probably apply to other areas of practice as well. So I really want you to any kind of practice area where a child might be engaged in it, definitely come out and see if there are tools for your own. We're going to have the summer off, sort of. We have the summer off, but we've made this plan to have a book club so that we all read a book over the summer and have a chance in September with Wendy Lacusta, who is really well known in the mediation community as a mentor and a fantastic mediator and a trainer. Really happy to be the first facilitator of our minds around conflict resolution topics related to the #1 ladies detective agency. Okay, so those of you who know the series, it's definitely a series, but we are going to focus so that we don't do spoilers. If you only read them, be conscious of that. But I definitely encourage you to have a look at it. Our 29th. October 27th is, of course, like the event of the entire year because I'm watching it. I've got a colleague that I've been working for the last year from Seattle is coming up. She's a labor mediator in Seattle, which has absolutely, and how they can completely change the culture, and what we should be doing to include but we should not be playing games where we try to kill each other at Christmas time. It shouldn't be not fun with the 6-year-olds all leaving the table crying like I used to do every single Christmas. Man, Boxing Day was an ugly time in my household. But we want to talk about the way that some of these collaborative games create your own games for different environments, and that's something that we did together at a game jam last year. So we're bringing some tools that we've created. Should be October 27th, definitely encourage you to come out there. And then November 25th is our annual ethics workshop. So to be facilitating that conversation, we'll have a number of questions coming from a variety of our board members. We've been tracking. Okay. Online audience. In order to participate and get credits for participating here today, we need to make sure that you're asking questions and be following the Twitter feed. For people in the room, I am not rudely doing something. I will be following. You can also email us at coreclinic@gmail.com, and I will put questions that I receive at that email to Tom. There's a slight, so your question won't come through instantaneously, but we will get it passed on. We're pleased about it that Tom has actually been a member of CORE for quite some time, and that started getting me involved in discussions, and has often been able to bring the perspective from his own really interesting to our other discussions. So Tom, I think most of you know, is a mediator, a land use planner, and a lawyer. Since 1987, Tom has been negotiating Northwest Territories. So these are agreements that range. Tom is going to talk about a very specific agreement, I believe, and talk about decision making, the cooperative management of protected areas. I'll pass it over to Tom.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk about two things basically. Co-management on the basis of consensus, and secondly, what we as mediators do with different contexts. So part one is going to look at the historic site, which I'll shortly describe, and I'm going to ground that in that particular protected area. I'm going to talk about the concept of reconciliation, as the Supreme Court of Canada has given that to us, and about consensus decision. Intending to turn to what we do. What are the roles? The next talk is a kind of mediation, but each of those kinds of is a lens through which we can see the other kinds of mediation. So I think we share a whole bunch of themes and techniques, but they have different kinds of cultural mediation. And I'm sure you think, but you have different emphases in the kind of mediations you do. So hopefully the different things we do casts a light on, and we learn about what we ourselves are doing. So before I get going, I have a question for you though. I'm talking about these two things. My question, how interventionist do you feel? How much do you want to, it's been a long day and I'd rather just listen, okay? More time for engagement, or alternatively, option 2, risk we're at right now. So option 1, who wants to engage? Put up your hands.
I would engage, but I feel like I'm one of the least qualified to engage. So
Are you an option? Are you an engagement?
I'd like to listen to you and then to see if I engage.
Okay. Okay. So let's go on. Give you a little background. Basically, the work I do, they call me a facilitator. I work in the Northwest Territories, sometimes in Nunavut. Facilitation is part of the culture of decision making with the Aboriginal. That's how they is more working in the field of conflict than in conflict resolution. If I use the word mediator, I say no. We want you to be a facilitator here because they want to prevent conflicts and they want to get away from the conflict, the concept of that they're in some sort of a conflict here. Draw a line down, you know, a rate is dropped and mediation begins typically in this province. And whether I'm working in the field of facilitation, we share a bunch of common practices, a code, but the facilitator has a few more tools they can use because they're in advance of a conflict, so a little more wide open. So I'm going to be talking about me as a facilitator, but it's the same thing you do as mediators. Secondly, most of my work is multi-party or facilitation. It's more accurately, when I think about it, multicultural facilitation. Multi-party facilitation, parties bring, we know our interests after working together for a period of time. What comes up on a daily basis is the different cultures that people bring to the table and the need to reconcile realities and the values they bring to the table. So let's say when I was first hired to do this contract, 1996, different than what I'm doing now as a co-chair of a board in the same protected area. And in the former situation, I have to, if you like, people to use this consensus decision making, whereas in the latter, so both those are using this process of consensus decision making, but one is less and the other is more. Negotiate various or mediate the negotiation or facilitate negotiation of various protected areas. Sometimes they land use plan. Sometimes they take the form of which is mandated by another agreement which has so this place called Saoyú-ษehdacho consists of those two peninsulas, ษehdacho in the north and Saoyú in the south on the larger dimensions. Tuktonurit National Park, Tok is west of Alatuk. In this map, this is Saoyú. This is about 80% crown lands, 20% originally held lands or Saotu lands. Same with ษehdacho, 80-20%. So the incorporates both kinds of land and both kinds of land. Protection. We've got to find some other vehicle pieces of land. So the lake itself is within what's called and again here, Saoyú-ษehdacho. It's the in the world, probably the last really pristine huge. It's, before I go on, I have to really acknowledge the role that the elders of this little place play in the management of this place and advocating. Delany is a little community right here. This is Alfred Tapp, one of the elders of Delany. They basically, which advanced this thing, brought it to the table, first in the Saoyú-ฎacho Land Claim Agreement, and then by what's called traditional knowledge. The point I want to make here is traditional knowledge is not the original equivalent of scientific. It includes that, but is much wider in its concept of that. So it's an evolving body of knowledge, as is a body called traditional knowledge, which it's the responsibility of the elders to pass on to the younger generation. So peer review their own knowledge. The elders will get together, and thanks for letting me know. And natural, they want to puzzle things out. They want to see the land as one vast organism. So they literally see that lake, which Great Bear Lake, or veins of heart. So I also worked on and facilitated called the Great Bear Lake Watershed, called the Water Heart, and it goes into that. They make it with the interconnectedness of all things and the responsibility of all people for the land, the world we live in. So here's what we're talking about. This is a cultural camp. We have at Ecological. Every year we have a cultural camp out on the land. This is part of the Saoyú camp. They typically harvest a lot with and this their rights set up under the laws recognize and guarantee this right to harvest within this protected area. One of the archaeological sites on Alfred, this is where Alfred used to live. Just a boat traveling. And when we say the land, that means the national park traditionally conceived an empty piece of land. The people are one large, again by consensus, it really understanding ecological relationships. At least that's what I was led to believe. So next thing I want to turn to is reconciliation. Basic theme here. So in many judgments, who here are lawyers? In several judgments, since the late 1990s, a case called Vanderbilt, fundamental objective of land claim agreements, and in fact in Section 35 of our Constitution Act, is the reconciliation of the interests of Aboriginal Canadians. They said that this is the purpose of those rights. So we need to give careful what this concept means. So to heal, harmonize, apparently conflicting things, compatible. So in the case where the work I do, it's about different realities, it's about seeing their actions that they can be made complementary, rather than trading one off against another. Most of my work, as I'll say later again, is about not compromising. So we work at things until we find a reconciliation. And that is often almost different reality. It's an ongoing relationship and project. The Supreme Court basically we have to do on an ongoing basis. So it's not something we can put aside and say, okay, on to the next thing. Every day in our work on the Saoyú-ฎacho Management Board, which I'll shortly describe. So it's a little like the existential often Heidegger, being is an issue. It's always an issue. It's never resolved. Every day, and we have accumulated merit from yesterday, right? Same challenge about who we are and how we're going to decide ourselves to resolve. So this reconciliation rights, because these agreements are part of what recognized in our Constitution, and which respect are, if you like, gain their power from their working together. So what do we actually mean by that in the concept, in the context of reconciliation? So to me, the famous dictum, ethical maxim, is an interesting way of looking at this. Is to treat all humanity, whether in our own person without of any other, not only his means to our ends, but his ends in themselves. So I ask myself, okay, what it really speaks to is the fact that we don't know what that end is. We have to make that end, create ourselves, and then when we're facilitating a meeting, our job is so that Angela can realize what she is, realize what they are and what they're intended to be. About self-determination, whether of organizations, and it's fundamentally about participation in and that's speaking solely about consensus. So you might Western philosophy into Aboriginal. The way the Aboriginal elders I work with, the way they treat other people, they have a lot of things in common. Concept that Emmanuel Kant has given words to, and in fact, only making it so, and the ethical tradition. So it's an interesting hypothesis with which to approach what Aboriginal elders mean when they speak. The only problem with Kant is he restricted to humanity. Certainly, many other people who use on mutual respect would extend it not only to humanity but to our own. And I work with certainly do that. So that's the grounding. It's mutual respect runs through. So the negotiating mediator more often several of these agreements. There's a different path. Finally, people sharing decision making. Culmination of 12 years of discussion and 4 previous agreements. Another example, for example, the Northern Agreement deals with that national park you saw to the map. That's a national park now. That agreement really took probably 8 years of negotiation. First, an agreement recommended to the Government of Canada through a vice body on the Inuvialuit final agreement, and then find that process. But each of those is a very different. My suggestion is it's a modest contribution to reconciliation. Consensus is a long tradition, and import that into this younger tradition. Parks, national historic sites. And that way we're trying to reconcile of law. So the National Parks, the Canada Wildlife Act, Fisheries Act, these all have agreement. And in the case of Tukanora, in the case of the National Parks Act, is brought through an agreement this tradition of Aboriginal decision making in those protected areas. And some of you who may be doing that so as not to fetter the minister. We can reconcile those two things. So these agreements, the Crown, Parks Canada, representing other Canadians. There's no term on these main elements of this. Basically, it structures that relationship. Just the agreements are the Saoyú, the Delaware Movers versus Council, which has powers over the matters, and Park. Again, this protects and incorporates the Saoyú lands would not be protected. People often own the land, right? Therefore, they control the land. A lot of inferences. Ownership of land is one thing under a land tenure agreement, and real control of that land is quite a different thing. Plus, prospectors who enter with minimal notice, seeking claim for recording office. They are being managed cooperatively as one whole. By consent, do this thing, natural management, to which all of those parties appoint members. Which, interestingly enough, the agreement also And it says the board shall work, but also says Parks Canada Corporation shall be present and shall send authority to this table so that we can find a consensus to the degree that the superintendent wields or is delegated authority by the minister. So we can make deep by consensus, which are decisions right there. There's also provision, of course, for referring some larger decisions to the respective. Right now, for example, we're working on a management plan. That's a larger thing. It's provision for us to develop that by consensus and to refer that to the CEO, etc. So we cast the net of consensus more broadly. Still working by consensus. Do that. Decisions are by consensus. We have not fettered the discretion of the minister. If any of you are interested in that, but that later, it's a case called Moore's 2001, which is this relationship in the case of ʻehdacho, where that was questioned for a court of Canada.
I'm just going to encourage you to be quiet for the online audience.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Well, the impetus came from those elders again. They consider these places sacred, and so they're identified in the Saoyú-ʻehdacho Agreement, negotiated there, places for which more work needs to be done. And that's where the series of subsequent agreements is in train.
Okay.
But it comes ultimately from the value of those places to the Aboriginal Authority and a recognized interest with the Government of Canada, Parks Canada. This proposal went to the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada first. It advises the minister responsible for site because of what it tells all Canadians, the relationship accepted by the minister of national importance. So it's now nationally significant to bring that to fruition.
Okay.
So consensus is not to describe as a concept in practice, at least we're using. It traditionally, Aboriginal on the land, different seasons of the year, sit down together, discuss consensus on how to treat. It was an ongoing relationship. When the Aboriginal peoples held the balance of power, we see similar ongoing relations between Wolf and the Iroquois, the Six Nations. Treaties renewed annually, an ongoing relationship. So those are oral cultures. Consensus really is about how we act, how we comport ourselves, how we make mutual decisions. And it's not just about results or it's an ongoing relationship. It's a challenge sometimes, but by the same token, it's rewarding. Because participants bring different cultures and authority structures. We all have these partitions in our mind, right? And we have to be aware of those traditions and help dissolve those partitions. Example, 5 years or so with Buffalo National, with what's called a research advisory. It was Government of Canada, Government of Alberta, and a guy from Brazil. And one of our early meetings was, so their job was to advise the minister responsible for the environment on what to do, which an environmental assessment panel had said kill them all. So the reservoir of brucellosis and tuberculosis would probably still persist. It was quite inconsistent with the Aboriginal tradition of how you. So they formed this committee, and one of the reason I'm bringing this is about culture. Early meetings, consensus on what research is needed to understand those and wolf predation and how predation and those diseases interact with each other and habitat changes. So, but their method of testing, is, in science you cannot prove a hypothesis. You can only fail to disprove a hypothesis. Philosophically, by trying to refute it. And this is Karl Popper has wrote a book called Refutations, an old philosophy book. The whole thing's in the title, but anyway, that's how you test hypotheses. scientific. The bigger it gets a chance to be a little more true, you know. And over time, try to refute. Our inability to refute, way at it, and interchange. That's their culture, right? They brought to that table. The Aboriginal participants grew with that. For them, that way of interrupting each other, vigorous interchange, just was this up to them, and they agreed then. As soon as they became aware of it, the scientists said, "Yeah, we can live with that in that tradition." And so that those different cultures, different ways of proving hypotheses, different values, those culturation in this consensus process. We're for different realities. So we as a in the Saoyú-ฎacho board, of which I'm the co-chair, I'm kind of the facilitator of that board, we've been working, understood, implement those as we see fit. So it isn't about interests really. We have common interests. It's about the different realities people and different values people bring to the table, which are always emerging. So Amanda wants to develop a management plan for that place. What's a what emphases, what priorities going to have for that place. But that vision, that we have a very different bunch of concepts and realities that bring to this table. So we have to find an accommodation for different realities. I'm a player, so to me, when we finally drafted, so I drafted, you know, what we're going to do instead of hedging on in this agreement. To me, reality, that's an important achievement. Log, skin, and build a cabin. A different reality it brings you to. We had just on the weekend another issue. We have research flights. People go up there in a spot to agree. Those are now in dire straits, that population throughout Canada. So we're using the SCAT to analyze, better understand their population structures. But people see wildlife on those flights. So, like community observer, we have 2 staff on that flight. People come up and say, "Where'd you see the animals? What's there?" So, it's very uncomfortable in the long term. But the tradition, the Aboriginal tradition, is sharing of the harvest, and sharing of knowledge, sharing of observation. So we have to work out a way of accommodating those 2 different perspectives. The other, hire a staff person, say, and that person is given the title of site manager. Well, that's what they are in the federal system of classifications, a PM, whatever, you know. But that person is actually part of a consent process. So it's not the manager. Surely I make the final decisions here. You guys will advise me, and I'll make the final decisions here. That's the way I'm among many, as is the superintendent. And we try to find different voices, and we weave those together. Work at it until the decisions in our mind can be. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Very much in favor of women's liberation and men's liberation because of the same thing. But there are often these little pockets of individual and inconsistent attitudes, right? Which undermine. So we're always trying to undercover in a gentle way, deal with those partitions. So these daily challenges somebody else, because when a public servant speaks, it's like a Japanese painting. You don't, you know, it's what's not on the page. The white in the Japanese ink painting. So we got to be able to hear everything that's being said there, and so it's all about. So in the board, we have basically we take this consensus, adapt it to very different cultures coming to the table and learning to work with each other over do the specific things we're wrestling with at every meeting. The cadence different than in other forms of decision making. It's more of a slow piece of music. So we give space listening, there's no interrupting. It's about being an opportunity to learn. I got our lives, how much of many we have, we learn from mistakes, right? So it's all about and listening. And so, table, people are never held to this or that. They're allowed to understand, he's allowed to change it, we finally bring together the consensus of the representatives of those organizations. They're expected to bring the interests of those organizations and the perspectives to the table, but they have a public duty to try to find consensus. That duty derives from and we have common interests, and we try to find common perspectives. We try to integrate those perspectives in a coherent whole. So again, it's more about accommodation than it is about compromise. The Supreme Court of Canada is forever talking about compromise, accommodation, in the sense of finding a room in the same house for those different traditions. It's about group decision making. It's about decisions, and it's about sound group decision. So, as in the word, those come to the surface. Decisions. So, we will employ that more. So it's a longer-term process. Our relationship have co-evolved at the table in the same sense that insects and birds co-evolve with plant species to pollinate those plant species by different vectors, plant vectors and animal vectors, right? If we look at expectations of progress, and result is different, and the results are different time. Our normal, I think, expectation is in 4 hours we're going to get more results. And so people, when I first, I'm not sure if we're making progress here. They'd say at the end of the first day, right? We got a workshop. Okay, we're working these things out. I want to see that because that means there's a crisis in their mind, and they're unconscious to help to work it out that night. So I rely on sleep a lot, actually, in those early workshops, and then we come back with fresh minds, right? So we don't get results. The curve of progress is more of an exponential curve. My glasses on this thing, but it's often tough, right? Then the consensus facilitator to listen, draw together those different strands, and I see as the elements of this consensus. Is that right? And I'll check with every person. We'll go back and keep working on it. But it's it comes to that consensus slowly. So let's talk about roles. Facilitators intervene. The only question in my mind is to what degree we intervene. We can intervene from hardly at all to extensively. Negotiation process, a respectful mood, and oversee a process of decision making, and to weave together the consensus to identify it at the end. You say then what mood. That's just what I call their respectful comportment. We have some very privileged roles, actually. A lot of power, which isn't always obvious, because we say we leave substantive decisions with the parties, right? Or we say, or we can by what we say, but more often by how we comport. At least where I work, we've been working together for many years, and again, that relationship is different than the relationship at month 24 among the parties, right? It varies then. So, remember the old fairy tale? Gets 3 wishes from the fairy, right? The rabbit can't say, oh, I'll have a few more, please. You get 3 and that's it, right? You have limited opportunities for intervention. The cultures of the people at the table and their expectations of your roles. And I'm sure that's true of all of us. But it varies. around contact. So the process involves fairly sophisticated clients, and as we work together, my role is to push the little roll of snow off the top of the hill, intervene now and then, keep it on track. They'd say enough. We don't need that stuff. Negotiate agreements and then they forget them. Because that compartment of our mind again. There was an assumption on some people's part that the corporation and the Delaware Resources Council, which have approved that last read. So but that the minister doesn't have sole decision-making authority here, because that's the context somebody otherwise, right? So we bring this mood to negotiations. Tom Thompson used to say that he painted the mood of scenes, not the scene itself. Of that ability to bring that mood, those assumptions, that paradigm of how we're going to behave into negotiations. Decision-making rests with the party. And yes, we pull it together, and yes, I may even draft the minutes at the end, but they approve at the end of the day. So again, where I work at least, they don't want to hear a bunch of rules. Some of them do not want to be told a bunch of rules. They don't like rules a lot. They'd rather go on unwritten rules, comportment type rules. So at least awareness of the cultures of participants, potential reconciliations of realities into one coherent through which we understand what we. So how are we doing for time here?
You've got a good half hour to have.
Okay. So at this point, I want to give the opportunity to ask whatever kind of questions you want, or the online people. You can get a little more into this kind of stuff. Hopefully it engages your interests.
Well, what I'm going to say though is just I'm going to flag one of the problems with sound is the is pointed out. So, Derek, I'm sure you right there and having a good carrying voice.
Yeah.
But pretty much everybody else is going to have to move to the front to make sure that they're by the mic. So I apologize for that, but even from
There's a chair.
Or you can point.
Yeah. You can come join and actually be part of it.
Yes.
Well, that'd be
Ah.
lovely.
Direct my voice here.
Good.
Yeah.
It's about how it's initially, and then the ongoing conducted from a physical point of view. Are you always in the Northwest Territories? How many people are involved? The length of time each day goes, and inside or out. How just I'd be very interested to hear that.
Okay. Well, they're pretty much always in the Northwest Territories, and often in the community. The number varies. So when we did the Great Bear Lake Management Plan, for example, there were 24 elders not being involved in that. Vigorous involved. So I would meet with them for a day before every to tell them what we're talking about and get their understanding of those, and help them voice to their perspectives and the interests which they bring to the table. We would then meet for 3 days, and we did that management plan over 3 years in a series of 3-day workshops, 3 or 4 a year. We always, I'm sure the kind of work you do as well, process first, and then we negotiate substantive things thereafter. Negotiations involved in my facilitating procedural negotiations, which identify attack those chapters, workshop by workshop, subject matter. So sometimes on something we have to park that thing. So we'll establish a process by which be accomplished a substantive decision. case, all these elders, we had representatives of the federal and territorial governments, probably about 8 people there. Some of the co-management bodies took place, so sometimes. So that's one of the in the board we're talking about here. There's several agreements to come to the Saoyú-ฎacho negotiated the National Historic Site there. Then we had to do something called a commemoration statement. The values, why they're nationally important, what's nationally important about that place. The agreement had to be signed off. That was a workshop of about 30 people, I guess. Then we moved to what's called area strategy that Angela, when she lived up there, that involved several parties and a lot of homework. And finally, this place was merged from that protected areas vision, and they wanted to confirm that vision, and that was then the actual negotiation took into an agreement. Sorry, the Saoyú-ฎacho Agreement, probably about 10 people. Similarly with and that took place about a year, and then intensive negotiations for 6 months because we wanted to get this thing done. We liberated us to intensely on that, so we met then every month. Some pretty intense negotiations. Those negotiations took days. Again, it was a process that you knock off the elements of it, and then you bring it together at the end. The principle, make sure it all fits well together, is to try to fit together and reconcile each other.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question, and how that was really incompatible with how the elders wanted to discuss, like the big process and this whole idea of talking about these huge ideas for a long period of time has really been like transformative for the parties and for their attitudes to each other and to the shared matter at hand, or whether you think that people.
Well, in fact, I've been told privately by Parks Canada that's the best part of my work. Really, the opportunity to participate in these kind of engagements. Those elders I was talking about are really and they have a real integrity about them. When they say we share, they really mean it. And I think the respect is they enrich each other. And they enrich each other increasingly over systems of law. In the Great Bear Lake Management Plan, my job as a mediator, a drafter, find a way of bringing the elder system of law into the system of law that I'm training as a. And we achieve that to a fair degree. We get a fair amount of bite there, forcible. We're trying to reconcile systems of law, yeah. So in that case, we actually, I gather these elders stuck one head of each chapter as kind of like a parable to illuminate the story, because their law is things decision making. It's more like principles. That is, it's more like in a sense like. Well, again, they're more like ends in themselves, right? But I think we all learn from it. I think I'm fairly representing the other participants, the other public servants and the Aboriginal people, saying that realities are changing.
Like such a rare and tremendous opportunities should be addressed somehow. You know, it's really
Develop this thing in parallel with it separately from us up there. But yeah, I think we can reconcile that case Moresby Explorers. Moresby as a company, an ecotourism company, it challenges, the suit has fettered himself by passing over its discretion to the board. Goes before the court says, yes, that board makes decisions by consensus, but in fact, those decisions are recommendations to the minister, who happens to be present at the table. We have non and consensus coexisting. So I think it can be used more widely, but they're willing. And I perhaps it might work as like a simpler experiment, right? Parties, clearer land distinctions, land between agreements. The question then is, can we relax that experiment, make it a little more, and still make it work? I think the answer is give it a try.
I'll see if I can be loud enough.
No, you're going to have to get out. There's no way.
No,
I was
no,
actually.
Facilitator, what is sort of some of the techniques that you use with people who have no experience with consensus decision making at all, the process, and have them comfortable with the timelines involved of a process? Because many of us.
I think my role then I can be more rules, and I can institute this process of respectful interaction. I can control the pain, the process for substantive things, of course. So much comfortable, and so I guess my role is to help us find. It can be done, but I will talk before beginning any process. It's like we got a lot of conflict here. This is going to be a challenging thing for you. They say that. But in fact, we had consensus. I said you're never going to get consensus there. Those parties are totally opposed to each other, but we've agreed to give it a whirl. Well, we had consensus totally within 6 months. We could do things, you know. So I think our job is to try to accomplish my purposes here very well, and they're long. Because we're establishing relationships. Does that help at all?
I think so. It's strange to see it. It's such taking authority is obvious and outlined in agreements, and this is such a that sometimes the path from one to the other is not so obvious.
Well, we'll be able to and eliciting interest. So in the Politics case, took an Orient agreement about a year on negotiating common purposes for that national. National parks normally get their purposes from the National Parks Act. We added a whole bunch of purposes of the National Parks Act, and that became the common ground for participants to say. And we developed that by consensus, without me, laboring the word consensus. Just establish it, right? If you're participating, I'll give you a place to speak, right? So I'll try to dig down and or with you. What are your? Because you have several in the sea that we got to bring to the surface, right? So my job is to catch those words from the surface and write them down, finding common ground there, and then on that basis, move on from here. And in fact, those principles, purpose, we go see them and go back to us because they're our compass in that agreement. Same parties, it's the right currency. But they find them. It makes sense to make it something which is comfortable for everybody. Is what they're doing. It doesn't have to be 100%. But I'm happy to, if anybody wants. There's my. I wrote a chapter for a book recently. It's years ago. Scribner's, whatever it is. Yeah.
And then I have one from online for you too, Tom.
Sure. Yes, come and have a seat. You're part of it now.
All right, but just make sure, Tom, you don't just speak to Jim here.
Sorry.
Because you'll drop your voice.
Keep me online, sorry.
I'm curious how you incorporate a structure which is from the native culture. You have to arrive at a structured agreement. And from my experience with the native people, it's with elders, a way of being, not necessarily part of their daily life. Dealing with the difference between doing and being comes to mind, and on a way of being. I'm just guessing at that.
Yeah. So our doing has to be.
And how do you manage that? That was
by
my
listening,
question.
by eliciting those values
Okay.
from the very first. Those interests, those common interests. That's why the Great Lake Management Working Group developed that management plan. Or elders there and to spend time, as I was saying to this lady, eliciting common purposes, so that you know that you're accomplished. So I'll go back to or the New Value find to find traditions. They have to. I guess that's so to be able to understand where they're coming from. Yeah, that takes time. Yeah.
And rather than say that takes time, it's time is integrating to know each other, which is not.
So I like your question because here I go pointing out here now. I'm not talking. Yeah.
Like, what makes a good human being in this other organization, which is like the other part of Canadian society, wants to integrate and basically influence how they live in a funny way. And so, as a guy for their governance. In this case, and accommodate, I think the only seen work is time. No, but you exactly what I mean when I say have this value.
Okay, so I guess the facilitator has to, in terms of a reputation, because you're much visiting, listening, only in that context. With time, you come to be a new Aboriginal group comes to you say, this guy.
But that's you.
Yeah.
How does that relate to the rest? Like that does not Ottawa, right? Like Ottawa is not.
Well, they're coming, they're listening to you. It's about giving the slower kids an opportunity to hear each other and to work conflicts, which but to try to find ways of reconciling those in a positive way. So, well, again, when I call people before a meeting, when I first started off, they will, there's a conflict here, and they, I'm sure you run as mediator yourself, especially in family. The problems are my husband, or the problems are my wife. Instead of realizing we have warring principles, and we've got to resolve those ourselves. So here, our job is to listen to each other, develop, and demonstrate some progress so they can see, yeah, we're making progress here. We're willing to do this another time. It's very much about that exponential curve. At the end of whatever you're doing, show some kind of results through this gradual process where people, that's the first one's the most difficult.
So, read you an online question, and I apologize for the fact that I've got it's got some quotes. I'm doing them there. Process empath to monitor the emotional climate of the building process, or does this division of the facilitators detract from synthesizing closure?
Probably both would work. I mean, probably both would work. But I guess I see my role as very much, yeah.
Yeah, so you wouldn't imagine breaking up the facilitator role and having somebody you whose specific role, for instance, was mood watcher or tracking those things.
Well, I asked the participants that actually. But the facilitator is a person in a different context. And they're different because they're different contexts, right? A whole family of interests, values under that we gradually become aware of. Is that?
Yeah.
How can you guys are just leaving a bunch of questions?
The only time I've ever used it is actually in a classroom setting, so I was actually curious if others used a process empath or a mood watcher, because I have assigned in learning somebody to be responsible for wordings, because I find that it's actually quite useful. And so, I learned it from books on facilitation rather than, but I've never actually seen it used, so I was just.
Well, there's always budget stuff, right?
Yeah,
How much-
somebody
yeah.
in the room who was participating as opposed to bringing in somebody.
You didn't have to pay that person.
They were paying.
It's nice to see Tom again. So my question, it's a few slides back around the participants. It said they are representatives, their perspective. So I guess I'm sort of struggling with that. Do they actually represent, part of my question is, how does then the broader community of might be there? You've spoken about the elders a little bit. How do you bring them to the process?
So the first question again is representatives, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you say they're not representative.
Well, they're not. Their duty, and it's part of it, is to consult their appointing parties, and they're paid for this, and the interests of their parties. Also thereafter, brief or report back to their appointing parties. Again, they're paid for that. A day in each end.
So in that, they have a responsibility, and they
aren't just representatives. Their job is to find everybody's job here. Their job is because according to these agreements, this Saoyú-ฎacho Agreement, there's no fallback of voting. Now, when you took an Northern Agreement, there is a fallback of voting. But since 1998, we've never.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing is spoken of is bringing the rest of the community.
The reporting back thing and the consulting thing. The second part, we have an open door policy. Anybody walks in the room, that's his process actually. So, but you might be expected to be asked. So it comes to one of our board meetings, introduce you, and I'll later. What do you think about that? So it's all just about weaving that the whole is strong and the agreement will have longevity and real cogence. So again, identify and write out that family of interests is vulnerable to future conflict. So our common duty in our procedures, our board procedures, is to bring those interests to the table and to seek consensus.
I think that's amount of investment of time and effort into that is really important, because often a process will set up, we're going to do consensus decision making, effort around doing work around interests and taking the time doesn't happen, and then parties are disappointed because it's not real, it can't actually make it happen with a short period of time.
Is that if we have the right participants and we have time, I have no worries about all itself. Okay?
Right?
And referendums, that kind of thing.
Well, I guess I'm lucky in the sense that the Super National Parks Act has, I guess, in the context I've been working in, we can bring delegated to the table. So a superintendent has delegated from the minister. No, as you know, no minister makes all decisions. The bureaucracies. She makes an author. It's made. The minister can't say, "Wait a minute." Well, not legally anyway.
Yeah.
There's one decision, and how you allocate that decision is another matter. But I guess we're finding that if parties are willing to invest in this longer-term relationship, or can be convinced over time to send authority to the table, then it's a much stronger relationship. But the real question is, do they really want to establish a consultative?
So would you do any work in advance to help?
Process means who's going to speak for each of these parties, what time frame we go, what kind of budget, all those, what are the chapters? Things are dealt with up front, the equivalent of we want to make sure that we understand the level we have at the table. And if there isn't authority there, we had no authority at the table. We didn't have enough money, and the minister refused to give us more money. So it wasn't fully implemented. But to some degree, it was. It's a very systematic process. Trying to convince participants this is worth it.
Well, we're to the end. I apologize. I keep kind of yelling at everybody to get up here, but we will. I emphasize what ends up happening. The live stream is actually recorded and is responsible for continuing professional credit. Well, I'm going to step up and just answer you credit for continuing professional development in watching it, provided you watch the recorded one with another lawyer or a law student. Otherwise, it only if you're watching us live today. Did we have a question?
Really quickly.
Then come up, Jim.
Go for it, it's fine.
Yeah, this is my whole point. It has to be captured.
All
This
right.
is where it's
Somebody
more
watches
interesting
it
to me. I
later.
mean, if I'm just sitting here, that is not good,
So,
on my part.
so when you're talking to the native, what are Canadian values that you take to the table, and so that you know?
Well, first of all, Aboriginal people's evolving values.
Like everybody
I
else.
mean, the Land Claim Agreement establishes totally new institutions, with and that's what we meet out of the land. And the land kind of influences us. And we may not give a whole lot of thought to it. Actually, it's part of who we are, you know. So if we allow that little seed to grow, give it the context in which it can grow, that's the purpose of these processes, to those. But we're all like the sea. We have all these currents down there. If a facilitator isn't fast, they'll come and they'll go. The value of our national parks, our national historic sites, they have some significance to us. Protection of the environment, some significance to at least some of us. Right now.
That was more my. Thanks.
You know, it's a gradual thing, right? It's a process of learning Canadians, actually. Sound like a preacher. I don't mean to preach to you guys, please. So anyway, give me a shout if you want.
Yeah, and for those people who are on, that you go to the court, you can download a copy of this, and for anybody here, not copies, but you can also download it. Walk to fantastic.
So, if you really want to get into this, anybody wants to get into this, I wrote this chapter because they have the exclusive publishing rights. I was into this in far more detail.
Keep us informed about it, Tom. We can announce it when the book comes out too,
Yeah.
for anybody who's been around. I know these can take a while. You know what? That's nothing. That's absolutely to everybody. We're going to shut off the live stream now. A few minutes heading out for those of you in the room, and thanks. June 11th.
If you got any questions, I'm happy to.